The house at the end of Blackwood Lane had been abandoned for decades, until the night Emma Carter saw a candle flickering in its attic window. No one had lived there since the Blackwood family vanished in 1923. No one could live there. But something was inside, and it was waiting for her. Emma hesitated at the threshold of Blackwood Manor, her breath misting in the cold night air. The town had whispered about this house for generations, speaking in hushed voices about the disappearances, the strange noises, the way anyone who stepped inside came back different. But Emma wasn't one to believe in ghost stories. She was a journalist, trained to chase the truth. Still, when the front door creaked open on its own, an unnatural chill slithered down her spine. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and something older, something rotten beneath the surface. The house looked untouched, dust thick on the furniture, a thin layer of decay coating the grand staircase railing. A heavy grandfather clock stood in the hallway, its pendulum swinging steadily, though no one had wound it in decades. As she stepped further in, the sound of her own breathing filled the silence, too loud, too present. And then, a soft thud from upstairs. She froze. The sound wasn't distant, wasn't imagined. It was real, heavy, deliberate. Someone or something was moving above her. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to flee into the safety of the night. But she had come this far. She had to know. Heart pounding, Emma placed her foot on the first step of the grand staircase. The wood groaned beneath her weight, but she climbed, each step an act of defiance against the unseen presence lurking above. When she reached the second floor, the candlelight flickering under the attic door caught her eye. She swallowed hard. It was the same candle she had seen from the street. Someone had lit it. Someone was waiting. Slowly, her fingers wrapped around the rusted doorknob. The door swung open. The attic was impossibly cold, far colder than the rest of the house. Dust swirled in the candle's dim light, casting restless shadows against the slanted ceiling. But it wasn't the cold that stole Emma's breath. It was the desk. The papers strewn across it were old, yellowed with time, but one page stood out, fresh, stark white, as if written just moments ago. Her heart stuttered as she stepped closer, reading the ink scrawled across it. Emma Carter. Again and again, her name had been written in shaking, frantic handwriting. Her throat tightened. How? She had never been here before. She had never written this. A whisper, slow and deliberate, curled around her ear. Welcome home. The candle sputtered out. Darkness swallowed the room. Emma's pulse thundered in her ears. The air in the attic shifted, thickened, as if something else was in the room with her. A rustling noise surrounded her, like footsteps moving across the floorboards. She reached out blindly, her fingers brushing against something warm, damp, and moving. She yanked her hand back with a strangled gasp. The whispers intensified, layering over each other, words tumbling in a chaotic symphony of voices. We've waited. You've come back. Emma? Emma. Emma. A shape loomed in the dark, something not quite human. Shadowed limbs, a head tilted unnaturally, its fingers curling toward her. The whispers grew louder, pressing against her skull. Emma stumbled back, but the door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang. The darkness felt alive, wrapping around her like a suffocating shroud. She screamed. The next morning, the town awoke to an unsettling sight. The attic window of Blackwood Manor was no longer dark. A candle flickered there, just as it had the night before. And on the old wooden desk, a fresh sheet of paper lay beneath a quill, a name written in shaky, terrified script. Emma Carter. She had become part of the house now, just like the others before her, just like the others still waiting, and the whispers would never stop. The antique shop stood at the end of a lonely street, its wooden sign creaking in the wind. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old books, faded memories, and something else. Something unsettling. Amelia had always loved exploring antique shops, drawn to the history that clung to forgotten relics. But on that rainy afternoon, something different drew her in. A doll. It sat on a dusty shelf, positioned between a cracked music box and a porcelain teacup. The doll was small, no more than a foot tall, with glassy blue eyes that seemed too lifelike. Its blonde curls were matted with age, and its once pristine lace dress was now stained with time. Yet, despite its wear, Amelia felt an odd compulsion to reach for it. "Ah, I see you've taken an interest in her," the shopkeeper, an elderly woman with piercing gray eyes, said from behind the counter. "That's an old one. Came in with a shipment from an estate sale." Amelia hesitated, her fingers brushing the doll's cool porcelain face. "Where did it come from?" The shopkeeper's lips pursed. "A family in Black Hollow. The mother passed away, and the daughter refused to take it, said it was cursed." Amelia chuckled, shaking her head. "Cursed? Dolls don't get cursed." The woman's gaze didn't waver. "Maybe, but sometimes things hold on to the past in ways we don't understand." Despite the warning, Amelia bought the doll. Something about it felt too special to leave behind. As she carried it home, she swore she felt its eyes on her, even when she wasn't looking. That night, she placed the doll on the dresser in her bedroom and climbed into bed. The storm outside raged on, wind howling against the windows. The house creaked and groaned, but Amelia was used to the sounds. It was an old house, full of quirks. Still, as she drifted into sleep, a faint sound stirred her awake. A soft scraping, like something shifting against the wooden dresser. She sat up, heart hammering, and scanned the room. The doll was still there, sitting in the same position she had left it. Amelia shook her head, chalking it up to her imagination. She turned over and closed her eyes. Then, in the dead of night, she heard the giggle. Her blood turned to ice. It was faint, almost indistinguishable beneath the sound of rain. But it was there, a child's laughter. Her eyes shot open, and she turned toward the dresser. The doll had fallen forward, its face pressed against the surface of the wood. A chill slithered down her spine. Swallowing her fear, Amelia got up, placed the doll upright, and returned to bed. She told herself it was nothing. Just the storm, the house shifting, the paranoia of buying something from a creepy shop. But over the next few days, things grew worse. Every morning, the doll was in a different position. Once, she found it lying on the floor, its tiny porcelain hand pointed toward the bed. Another time, it had been placed perfectly in the center of her nightstand, its lifeless eyes staring directly at her. Amelia tried to dismiss it, but deep inside, she knew something was wrong. Then, the dreams started. She dreamt of a little girl, no older than 6, standing at the foot of her bed. The child had dark, hollow eyes and a wide, unsettling grin. Her voice was soft, almost musical, as she whispered, "She belongs to me." Amelia woke with a scream, drenched in cold sweat. She threw the doll into the closet, slamming the door shut. But that night, the giggling returned, closer than before. The sound curled around her like a phantom touch, and when she turned on the light, the closet door was open. The doll sat at the foot of her bed. Panicked, Amelia grabbed it and ran downstairs. She threw it into the fireplace and watched as the flames consumed it. The porcelain cracked, blackened, and melted into nothing. The giggling stopped, replaced by the sound of crackling embers. Relief flooded her, and for the first time in days, she felt safe. But safety was an illusion. That night, something else took its place. As Amelia lay in bed, exhausted but hopeful, the air turned cold. The shadows deepened, stretching unnaturally along the walls. And then she heard it, a whisper, right against her ear. "Why did you burn me?" Her breath hitched. Her body froze in terror. She turned slowly, her heart pounding against her ribs. There, standing beside her bed, was the little girl from her dreams. But now, she wasn't just a dream. She was real. It was 3 a.m. when Daniel left the bar, the cold night air biting at his skin as he walked down the empty street. The city was silent, too silent. Then, from the corner of his eye, he noticed a man standing under a dim streetlight. The figure was unnaturally tall, with limbs too long for his body, dressed in a suit that seemed to ripple in the darkness. But what made Daniel's stomach twist was the man's face, stretched into an impossibly wide grin, teeth bared, eyes locked onto him. At first, the man didn't move. Then, without warning, he took a step forward, still grinning, still staring. Daniel's heartbeat pounded in his ears as he quickened his pace. The man did the same. His movements were unnatural, jerky, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. Daniel broke into a sprint, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He dared to glance over his shoulder, and his blood turned to ice. The man was still grinning, still staring, but now he was running, faster than any human should be able to. Daniel turned a corner, his lungs burning. He fumbled for his keys as he reached his apartment door. Just as he got inside, he slammed the door shut and locked it, his hands trembling. Silence. Had he lost him? He pressed his ear against the wood, listening. Nothing. Then, as he turned away, he heard it. A slow, deliberate knock. 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 And from the other side of the door, a voice, cheerful, almost singing. "Let me in, friend. I know you're in there." Daniel never opened the door, but when he looked through the peephole, there was nothing, just the empty hallway. Yet, every night since, at exactly 3 a.m., the knocking returns. At first, Daniel thought it was his imagination, maybe stress, exhaustion. He barely slept the first few nights, waiting, listening. The knocking was always the same, 3 slow, deliberate raps, then silence. He stopped checking the peephole after the first week. Something told him that if he looked long enough, he would see something. Something he wasn't supposed to. One night, the knocking didn't stop. Instead of the usual 3 knocks, it continued. Soft at first, then harder, faster. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he backed away from the door. It sounded like 1,000 hands pounding against the wood. The doorknob rattled violently. Then, without warning, everything went silent. A whisper slithered through the keyhole. "I can see you, Daniel." His heart nearly stopped. He hadn't told anyone his name. Daniel spent the rest of the night in the corner of his bedroom, gripping the baseball bat he kept under his bed. He didn't sleep. He didn't move. The knocking didn't return the next night, or the next. But the silence felt worse. Then, things started changing inside his apartment. His furniture would shift ever so slightly when he left the room. His TV would flicker on by itself, static hissing through the darkness. One night, his bathroom mirror shattered without explanation. But the worst was his phone. One morning, Daniel woke up to find a video on his phone. One he hadn't taken. His hands shook as he pressed play. The footage was grainy, dark, like it had been recorded in low light. At first, there was nothing, just his front door. Then the camera moved. It was inside his apartment. His bedroom door came into view. The knob twisted slowly. Daniel dropped his phone, bile rising in his throat. He didn't sleep that night. He didn't sleep at all after that. Then at 3 a.m., the knocking came back. Louder, more insistent. But this time, when he checked the peephole, there was an eye staring back at him, and the grin was wider than ever.